Some wars come to modify the course of events completely. One of those that most altered reality was the Second World War, a global conflict that accelerated, on different fronts, the appearance of inventions and devices conceived by the countries involved. The Nazi government, known for its documented crimes against millions of people, also participated in the creation of technical and mechanical projects that were first used in the military field, and which later became part of very different spheres. Although several of those developments did not contribute direct improvements to civilian life, some did end up being used outside the battlefield. But what were those creations that arose in the Third Reich that are still being used or that influenced what exists today? Panzerfaust, the pocket weapon that transformed modern warfare. During the final years of the Second World War, when the Third Reich began to crumble under the pressure of the Soviet advance in the East, Germany bet on a quick, lethal and economical solution to stop the push of enemy tanks. The result was the Panzerfaust, a kind of single-use tube equipped with a hollow explosive warhead designed to be operated even by peasants, recruited children or elderly men of the Volkssturm. Unlike previous rocket launchers, its handling was as simple as aiming and firing at close range. Its low cost and massive production made it possible to distribute it by the thousands, with the hope of slowing down the Soviet armored vehicles approaching Berlin. Although it had a very limited range, and the shooter was exposed after the shot, its destructive power was feared by enemy tank crews. When a Panzerfaust warhead hit the armor of a T-34, it could penetrate it and detonate its interior. It thus became one of the first truly portable and lethal hollow-charge launchers in history. The design of the Panzerfaust was ingenious in its brutal simplicity. It consisted of a disposable metal tube, preloaded with a conical explosive head mounted on a stabilizing rod. This head contained a shaped explosive that concentrated all its energy at a single point, allowing it to penetrate the thickest armor of the time. It was activated with an impact fuse, which made it effective only at close range. More advanced models, such as the Panzerfaust 60 and 100, could reach targets up to 100 meters away. Training was almost non-existent. It was enough to know how to place the weapon on the shoulder, remove the safety catch, align the sights, and pull the trigger. This turned the Panzerfaust into the preferred tool of German desperation on the Eastern Front, being massively distributed to armed civilians during the final weeks of the Reich. The impact of the Panzerfaust did not end with the war. Although it was created as a disposable and emergency weapon, its design laid the foundation for all modern anti-tank launchers. The concept of a lightweight portable tube operated by a single soldier directly influenced subsequent Soviet development. By analyzing the remains of the Panzerfaust, Russian engineers developed the RPG-2, an evolution that maintained the basic idea, but improved it with greater range and precision. That model would be quickly replaced by the RPG-7, which became the most widespread anti-tank weapon of the 20th century. The RPG-7, although more complex than the Panzerfaust, preserves its essence, a hollow charge warhead launched from the shoulder with the capacity to penetrate armor. Introduced by the Soviet Army in 1961, it had a more sophisticated propulsion system, deployable stabilizers, and a reusable design. It has been used by more than 40 countries in dozens of conflicts, from Vietnam to Syria, and its production remains active in many countries today. The reason for its longevity lies in its low cost, reliability, and ease of use. Unlike guided missiles or heavy systems, an RPG can be carried on the back by a single combatant, ready to fire and disappear in seconds. This tactic, known as hit and run, has its conceptual origin in the urban battles of Berlin in 1945, where Panzerfaust users hid in ruined buildings to attack tanks at close range and then escape through improvised passages. Besides the RPG-7, other Western launchers like the American M72 Law or the Swedish AT-4 followed the same design logic. They all share with the Panzerfaust the idea of empowering a single soldier with a tool capable of destroying armored vehicles without the need for artillery support. Even today, modern armies and irregular groups continue to use these principles in asymmetric conflicts. In areas like Ukraine, Iraq, or Gaza, the use of portable anti-tank launchers remains common, and many of these designs trace back directly to the experience and the original concept of the Panzerfaust. The technological legacy of the Panzerfaust goes beyond the weapon itself. It represented a way to democratize destructive capability on the battlefield. It was no longer necessary to have a heavy artillery piece or advanced military training to stop a battle tank. The technology behind hollow charges, which channel explosive energy into a jet of molten metal capable of penetrating armor, was refined and adapted in subsequent generations of ammunition. Currently, this principle is also used in warheads for more sophisticated anti-tank missiles, as well as in certain charges used by sappers to breach fortified structures. The Panzerfaust was a desperate response to an inevitable defeat, but it also marked the beginning of a new stage in land warfare. Its design forever transformed the way infantry confronted armored vehicles. Today, its influence is noticeable in every RPG used in current conflicts. An idea that arose amid ruins and desperation ended up shaping modern armament, demonstrating that even the darkest inventions of the past are still present in contemporary military development. M163 Comet, the Nazi experiment that paved the way for modern fighters. In the most intense years of the conflict, German engineers presented a revolutionary model in the history of military aviation, the Messerschmitt Me 163 Comet. It was the first rocket-powered aircraft used in combat and one of the most ambitious projects within the Nazi experimental armament program. Its inaugural flight took place on the 1st of September, 1941, although it did not officially enter service until 1944. Designed by the Bavarian engineer Alexander Lippisch, the Me-163 was a direct attempt to break the technological barrier against Allied air dominance by developing an aircraft capable of surpassing previously unthinkable speeds. The Comet was built with a very compact structure and no conventional landing gear. Propulsion was provided by an HWK 100-9509A2 rocket engine, fueled by two extremely dangerous propellants, T-STOF and C-STOF. This combination was highly corrosive and explosive, which made the aircraft a risk both to its enemies and to its own pilots. The official maximum speed reached was 624 miles per hour, a record at the time. This mark was achieved by test pilot Heini Dittmar in October of 1941, exceeding 600 miles per hour in level flight for the first time. Subsequently, unofficially, it would have even reached 700 miles per hour in July of 1944. The aircraft had a single crew member and an armament configuration centered on two Rheinmetall Borsig Mk 180mm cannons. Its main mission was not to engage enemy fighters in traditional dogfights, but to intercept high-altitude Allied bombers such as the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, or the British Lancaster bombers. In total, 16 confirmed downings are attributed to it, including extremely fast aircraft like the Mosquito, which until then could barely be reached by other Luftwaffe models. The Me-163 operated differently from any other fighter. It was towed by a kind of trolley with wheels that detached upon takeoff. The landing was done directly onto the fuselage, which required a precise and risky maneuver. This structural limitation, added to its autonomy of barely 7 minutes of powered flight, greatly constrained its tactical capacity. Once the fuel was exhausted, the pilot had to glide their return to the ground with no margin for error. These conditions meant that the aircraft, despite its power and speed, was also very vulnerable, especially during landing. In addition to the operational dangers, the fuel itself was responsible for numerous casualties among the pilots. The mixture was so aggressive that it could cause instant death if it came into contact with the skin or if a leak occurred in the system. It is estimated that at least 9 pilots died in accidents related to the Me-163, including Sergeant Siegfried Schubert, who crashed the same day he achieved his last 2 aerial victories. Lippisch himself declared that if someone introduced a finger into the liquid, only the bone remained. In combat, the effectiveness of the Me-163 was limited. Although its performance was impressive on paper, in practice its short autonomy, its internal danger, and its lack of versatility made it a risky gamble. Of the approximately 370 units built, only a few actually entered combat. The rest remained as prototypes or were stored. 9 units were shot down by enemy fighters, most of them P-51 Mustangs, and at least one was downed by a P-47 Thunderbolt. Despite its limitations, the Comet was a notable advance in the history of aviation, being the only rocket plane used as an interceptor fighter, Currently, no unit of the Me 163 remains operational. 10 examples are preserved in aviation museums in Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. All are on static display due to the complexity of their restoration and the potential risk of putting them back in flying condition. One of the best-known models is serial number 191301, which is located in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum at the Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. Despite having been an operational failure, the Me 163 left a significant technical mark. Its rocket propulsion, its unprecedented aerodynamics, and its vertical climb capability inspired later research in experimental flight. In particular, it served as a conceptual basis for models such as the Bell X-1 and the X-15 in the United States, used by NASA to study supersonic and suborbital flight. Its aerodynamic fuselage and compact design became references for wind tunnel tests and for optimizing the performance of space prototypes. Today, the technologies derived from the Me 163 are applied in advanced propulsion tests, including assisted takeoff systems and experimental platforms for short, high-altitude flights. Although the Comet did not fulfill its function as a decisive weapon in the war, it did help pave the way for the development of hybrid propulsion vehicles and manned rockets. Its history remains an extreme example of how wartime pressure can accelerate technological innovation, even if its practical applications do not become established on the battlefield. Fanta in 1940, the Nazi alternative that is now a global success. Without access to the usual ingredients, the German Coca-Cola factory was left with no options to maintain the original recipe. Instead of stopping production, Max Keith sought local substitutes and launched a different drink, designed for a market where everything was scarce. The result was a mixture made with whey, apple scraps, and other leftover fruit byproducts, nothing similar to the sweet soda that people know today. This drink, which was given the name Fanta, based on a suggestion derived from the German word fantasy, meaning imagination, became a local alternative to Coca-Cola, which could not be imported. Although born out of necessity, it ended up being popular among consumers facing food and beverage shortages during the war. In 1943, about 3 million cases were sold within the country. Keith, head of Coca-Cola GmbH, organized a contest among employees to name the new product. A salesman named Joe Knipp proposed the word Fanta, and the team adopted it immediately. The product not only prevented the factories from closing, but also allowed for the preservation of jobs and kept distribution active in Germany during one of the most difficult moments of the conflict. The original flavor had no relation to the current orange Fanta. The available ingredients changed according to internal market conditions, and each batch could have a different taste. Although an attempt was made to maintain a certain standard, consumers did not know for sure what the next bottle would taste like. Sometimes the apple taste predominated, other times it was more acidic, depending on the mixture used. The drink was also used as an ingredient in meals. Given that sugar was scarce, many people added it to soups and stews to provide sweetness. The intention was to take advantage of any source of flavor, and Fanta became a practical solution in a context where resources were limited. At the same time, the Nazi government viewed these types of products favorably, because they coincided with their policy of self-sufficiency and import substitution. Anything that showed that Germany could produce internally had official support. Besides Germany, other Coca-Cola plants in Europe also used the brand. In the Netherlands, for example, a different version based on elderberries was manufactured. That variant arose for the same reason: the lack of access to the original syrup and the need to continue manufacturing something that could be sold locally. When the war ended, Coca-Cola headquarters regained control of its facilities in Europe, including the German ones. Keith handed over all the documents he had maintained during the conflict, and with that demonstrated that his intention had been to protect the brand and prevent it from falling into state hands. Thanks to that management, the company still had operational factories, active distribution routes, and a certain recognition among consumers, which facilitated the subsequent reactivation. Fanta production was halted in 1949, but the idea did not disappear. In 1955, a bottling plant in Naples, Italy, launched a new orange-flavored version, using regional fruits. This brightly colored, citrus-flavored drink was the basis of what is known today as Orange Fanta. Its success in Italy led Coca-Cola to expand distribution to other European countries and later to other regions. In 1960, the company formally acquired the Fanta brand with all its rights. This decision was strategic, since in addition to capitalizing on the recognition it had gained, it allowed them to offer a product different from the main one at a time when Pepsi was beginning to grow. With Fanta, Coca-Cola could diversify its offering and continue to compete in the same market. The launch of Orange Fanta also marked a change of direction. It was no longer an improvised drink made with whatever was available, but a product made with selected ingredients to attract consumers. From then on, new versions adapted to each country emerged. In Japan, for example, flavors such as melon or yogurt were sold. In Brazil, Guarana Fanta appeared. In Mexico, Colita Fanta with a bubblegum flavor became one of the most popular. In Africa, some flavors like pineapple or blackcurrant represented up to 70% of sales in certain countries. In India, in addition to the classic orange, versions such as green mango were added, designed for local taste. In China, the green apple and watermelon varieties grew more than 30% between 2015 and 2018. Commercially, Fanta positioned itself as a fun drink, with campaigns aimed at young people. One of the best known was the Fantaness campaign in the 2000s, featuring models representing each flavor. Advertisements were also published with animated characters and spiral-shaped bottles to draw attention on shelves. In 2015, Fanta included digital strategies with a mobile application that combined games and promotions. The goal was to connect with teenagers through the platforms they already used. That same year, special flavors were introduced for celebrations like Halloween, with dark colors and thematic designs to attract more interest. Not all campaigns worked smoothly. In Germany, an advertisement that referred to the old times, when Fanta was created, was withdrawn for omitting the context of the Nazi regime. In the United Kingdom, another advertisement with phrases related to death received public complaints. In other campaigns, the use of models with idealized bodies or the attempt to use youthful language unnaturally was questioned. Despite that, the brand remained strong. Today, Fanta is sold in more than 190 countries and has more than 100 different flavors. The orange version continues to be the most popular, with about 70% of global sales. It is also the second most important brand within the Coca-Cola portfolio, only behind the main product. With continuous presence in stores, supermarkets, restaurants and vending machines, Fanta has consolidated itself as a recognized drink, especially among adolescents and young people. Its curved design bottle, introduced in 2017, was created to resemble the shape of a squeezed fruit and helped the product stand out at points of sale. The rocket that ushered in the era of missiles and space travel, the legacy of the Nazi V2. In the midst of the arms race between European powers, German engineers were developing a weapon that was unlike anything before, the V2, the first long-range ballistic missile. Its design aimed to cover great distances and attack without warning. The project began in 1936 at a coastal research base located in Peenemünde, in the north of the country. The technical direction fell to a young engineer named Werner von Braun, who, along with hundreds of specialists, began to build the most advanced weapon of its time. Unlike bombs dropped by planes, the V2 took off on its own with an engine powered by alcohol and liquid oxygen, exceeded 80 kilometers in altitude, and descended at supersonic speed, making it impossible to intercept once in the air. The first test launches occurred in 1942. One of them was particularly successful and is considered the first flight of a human-made object to exit the Earth's atmosphere. Although it still had accuracy errors, the Nazi command decided to move forward with its production. Manufacturing was moved to underground factories such as Mittelwerk, where thousands of prisoners from the Dora Mittelbau concentration camp were forced to assemble the parts in brutal conditions. Many died from exhaustion, mistreatment, or lack of food. Despite the human cost, the program continued. In September of 1944, the first V2 rockets were launched against London. The explosion of one of them in Chiswick marked the beginning of a new stage in the war. In total, more than 1,300 missiles were fired towards the British capital, causing the death of thousands of civilians. They were also launched over cities in Belgium and France. Although their military effect was limited compared to traditional bombings, the psychological impact was enormous. The population could neither see nor hear the rockets before they exploded, which generated a feeling of helplessness and fear. Allied authorities had no way to intercept them, so the only possible objective was to find and destroy the launch bases. At the end of the war, with Germany defeated, the Allies competed to seize the German technology. The Soviets managed to capture several facilities in the east, but it was the Americans who took the majority of the equipment and technical personnel. Under the codename Operation Paperclip, hundreds of scientists were secretly transferred to the United States. Among them was Werner von Braun, who soon after began working for the American Army. His knowledge about the V-2 rockets was used to develop new missiles, and later to start the space programs. In the first years of the Cold War, North American engineers used actual V-2 parts in their tests. One of the first experiments was launched from New Mexico in 1946, and reached a record altitude for the time. In some cases, cameras were even placed on board to take the first images of the Earth from space. This marked the beginning of a race that would transition from military purposes to the goal of reaching other planets. At the same time, in the Soviet Union, engineers also began to create their own rockets, taking the German design as a reference. Although the versions were adapted and improved, many of the basic principles came from the same origin. Over time, the knowledge developed for the V-2 served as the basis for more complex missiles, such as the long-range ones that would carry nuclear warheads. In the case of the United States, the Redstone, one of the first operational rockets, was directly derived from the V-2 and was used to launch the first satellites and the first astronauts. Von Braun himself became a central figure in the NASA space program, directing the development of the Saturn V rocket, which would allow man to reach the moon in 1969. What began as a weapon of war ended up being an essential part of the conquest of space. Despite the time elapsed, the legacy of the V-2 is still present in modern technology. The mathematical and physical bases for rocket navigation, liquid combustion engines, and the general structure of the missiles remain similar to those devised by the Nazi engineers. Although current versions are safer and more precise, many of the central ideas are still valid. Ballistic trajectories, propulsion, and guidance systems evolved from the first Peenemünde experiments. There is also an ethical dimension that has not disappeared. The use of forced labor and the direct link of science with war crimes have been the subject of debate for decades. Some of the scientists involved in the program were tried at Nuremberg, but others were integrated into state projects without facing consequences. The history of the V-2 not only left a mark on technology, it also showed how scientific advances can emerge in contexts of extreme violence. Today, several museums preserve examples of these rockets as a reminder of their impact and their origin. The V-2 was not a simple experiment. It was a breaking point in the history of war and science. What made it different was not only its destructive capacity, but its influence on everything that came after. From intercontinental missiles to the ships that explore other planets, the path began with that rocket launched for the first time from a platform on the German coast. Its design, its use, and its legacy are still alive in every modern launch, even if its origins date back to a time of darkness. Pervitin, the soldier's pill that changed war and the world. A small white pill began to circulate among German soldiers with a clear promise to keep them awake for days, erase fatigue, and make them advance without stopping. It was called Pervitin, and although its appearance was harmless, it hid a chemical power that would alter the way of fighting. Its main ingredient was methamphetamine, a substance that directly affected the nervous system, increasing concentration, suppressing fatigue, and eliminating the need for sleep. In the first years of the conflict, it was distributed in large quantities among the members of the Wehrmacht, especially in campaigns like the invasion of Poland and the lightning attack against France, when the objective was to keep the troops marching without rest. Its distribution was neither secret nor limited to the army. It was sold in pharmacies, with advertising also aimed at students or housewives, and the packaging suggested that a single dose was enough to face the day with energy. But in the hands of the army, it functioned as an invisible weapon. It allowed soldiers to walk without stopping, resist shifts of more than 40 hours, fight without hesitation, and act without restraint even in extreme situations. During the Western campaign, numerous cases of entire units were documented advancing without sleep for 3 consecutive days, driven solely by regular doses of this substance. The writer Heinrich Böll, who served as a soldier, wrote in his personal letters that with a few tablets of Pervitin, it was possible to get through endless days, and he asked his family to send him more. But along with this apparent advantage, severe side effects emerged: hallucinations, paranoia, aggressive reactions, physical and mental dependence. Some soldiers began to show erratic behavior, others collapsed after long exposures, and even suicides were recorded. As military doctors began to notice the adverse effects, the Army's Health Command recommended restricting its use, requiring a medical prescription to acquire it, although the practice of distribution among troops continued informally. After the war, the use of Pervitin did not disappear completely. In Germany, its production continued for years, and only in 1988 was it officially withdrawn from the pharmaceutical market. However, its formula had already transcended the military environment. Troops from other countries also explored the use of similar stimulants, such as American soldiers in the Vietnam War. But it was outside the medical and wartime spheres that this substance evolved into something much more dangerous. In clandestine laboratories, its structure was replicated and transformed into what is known today as crystal meth, a highly addictive drug with devastating effects on the mind and body. The legacy of Pervitin can be traced directly to these modern versions. Although the contexts have changed, the central effects remain the same: artificial energy, loss of sleep, intense euphoria, followed by a physical and psychological collapse. Nowadays, some methamphetamine-derived variants are still used in medicine under strict regulations, especially in treatments for disorders such as attention deficit or narcolepsy, but most of its use is linked to illegal production and consumption. The consequences are visible in regions where crystal meth has caused health crises, increased crime, and social deterioration. In many cases, users remain awake for days, develop paranoid behaviors, lose weight rapidly, and suffer irreversible damage to their mental health. The drug that once pushed Nazi troops to cross borders without sleeping, today pushes thousands of people into situations of abandonment and despair. It is a legacy that began with a tablet packaged for the soldiers of the Third Reich, designed to win wars without rest, and ended up becoming one of the most destructive synthetic drugs in the modern world. Although the uniforms and battlefields have changed, the substance behind the impulse is still alive, in illegal laboratories, in clinics, on the streets of multiple countries. The story of Pervitin was not buried in 1945, it simply changed form and setting. Engines for the Luftwaffe, cars for the world, the total transformation of BMW. BMW became a fundamental piece of the Nazi military apparatus. Its factories focused on producing engines for aircraft such as the BMW 801 and the BMW 003, both used by the Luftwaffe, as well as motorcycles like the R-75, which was specially designed to operate in difficult conditions thanks to its sidecar with traction. As the war progressed, the company became increasingly integrated into the Third Reich's economic system, adapting all its production to the regime's wartime needs. The growing demand for military equipment led BMW to depend on the systematic use of forced labor, including deported foreign workers and prisoners from concentration camps, such as Dachau. These workers were subjected to extreme conditions, exhausting working days, poor nutrition, and constant abuse within the industrial facilities themselves. The book commissioned by the company itself years later documented how its integration into the war economy was not passive, but active, seeking state contracts and expanding its infrastructure to better serve the regime's objectives. BMW factories were considered strategic installations, which is why they also became targets of aerial attacks, resulting in severe damage toward the end of the conflict. With Germany's defeat in 1945, the company was completely devastated. Its facilities occupied or destroyed, its reputation sunk, and its motorized production capacity prohibited by the Allied powers. During the first post-war years, BMW was forced to survive by manufacturing household utensils, such as pots, bicycles, and other minor products, that were not related to the automotive industry. It was not until 1948 that it managed to obtain authorization to resume motorcycle production, with simple models that were barely beginning to generate revenue. In 1952, the first post-war automobile was launched, the BMW 501, a luxury sedan that marked the company's return to the automotive sector. However, these models were expensive and their sales performance was limited. During that decade, BMW went through a deep crisis that culminated in 1959, when it was on the verge of being absorbed by its rival Daimler-Benz. The situation changed abruptly thanks to the intervention of the Quandt family, who acquired a decisive stake in the company and injected capital to save it. This family group, whose fortune had also been consolidated during the Nazi era, became the main shareholder and laid the foundations for BMW's business rebirth. From that moment on, a stage of total transformation began. In the 60s, the line known as Neue Klasse was introduced, a series of compact and sporty vehicles that combined elegant design, good engineering, and competitive prices. These models marked the beginning of the brand's new identity, much more focused on performance and aesthetics than on production volume. The reputation grew rapidly, and in the 1970s, the 3, 5, 6, and 7 series were launched, which still constitute the backbone of the BMW catalogue today. In parallel, the brand also created a division dedicated exclusively to high-performance sports cars, known as BMW. Its first vehicle was the M1, a supercar launched in 1978 that helped consolidate BMW's image as a manufacturer of powerful and sophisticated machines. Over the following decades, BMW transformed into an industrial conglomerate with a global presence. It acquired brands such as Mini and Rolls-Royce, expanded its production to countries such as China, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, the United States and India, and diversified its offering, including everything from compact cars to luxury SUVs and electric sports cars. In 2013, it officially entered the era of electric mobility with the launch of the BMW i3, a fully electric urban model, followed by the i8 Sports Hybrid, which combined futuristic technology with innovative design. These initiatives positioned BMW as a pioneer brand in electrification and sustainability within the premium market. Currently, BMW produces more than 2,500,000 vehicles per year and records revenues exceeding €150 billion. Its production lines include not only combustion and electric cars, but also advanced technologies for automation, connectivity, and autonomous driving. Its catalogue incorporates emblematic models that continue to be renewed, in addition to innovations in artificial intelligence applied to the driving experience. Today, BMW is among the most influential automotive brands in the world. It sponsors high-level sporting events, participates in global cultural initiatives, and maintains a recognizable visual identity in all markets. Its presence goes beyond the commercial and extends to the symbolic realm as an icon of modern luxury, technical efficiency, and German design. Despite its origins linked to Nazi war machinery, in recent decades it has managed to position itself as an industrial reference that combines tradition, innovation, and adaptability. BMW's evolution, from its beginnings in the manufacturing of aircraft engines to its current place at the top of the global automotive market, shows how a company can completely transform over time without losing its technological core or its capacity for reinvention. MP40, the submachine gun that changed urban combat and left a legacy in modern weapons. In the middle of the war, the MP40 became the most common submachine gun among German soldiers. Its structure was designed to be functional, lightweight, and easy to manufacture. Unlike many contemporary weapons, this model was built primarily with stamped parts and durable plastic materials, which facilitated its production in large quantities, exactly what the regime's war effort needed. It was mainly delivered to squad leaders, airborne soldiers, and tank operators, although as the conflict progressed, it began to be distributed more widely among direct combat units. The history of the MP40 begins with its predecessor, the MP38, which in turn was based on prototypes like the MP36. It was developed in 1938 by Heinrich Vollmer from a request by the German army, which sought a new compact and automatic weapon for close-range combat. The MP40 improved the previous design by simplifying production. It abandoned machined components in favor of stamped steel and reduced the use of wood to a minimum. A foldable metal stock was also introduced, an innovation that allowed the size of the weapon to be reduced when not in use, facilitating its transport without sacrificing accuracy when firing. In total, more than 1 million units were produced between 1940 and 1945. The submachine gun used 9mm parabellum cartridges and 32-round magazines. Although it was fully automatic, its low rate of fire allowed the shots to be easily controlled. However, its single-feed magazine was prone to failure if it became contaminated with dirt or was used as a hand grip, which was expressly forbidden during training. The weapon included a rest bar under the barrel to stabilize it when firing from vehicles. As the war progressed and urban combat became more frequent, especially after the encounter with the Red Army in battles like Stalingrad, the limitations of conventional German rifles became evident compared to Soviet submachine guns like the PPSH-41. This caused the MP-40 to gain even more prominence, being massively distributed to assault units. Its ease of use, portability and reliability at short distances made it a key weapon for modern combat. After the conflict, thousands of MP-40 were captured or redistributed by the Allies and ended up in the hands of armies and paramilitary groups around the world. In Norway, for example, it was officially used well into the 1990s. Its influence was clear in later models such as the Stasi 45 in Spain, the Yugoslav Zastava M56, and the Belgian Vigneron, which even shared the same magazine. It also inspired more well-known weapons, such as the Soviet PPS-43, the AK-47 with its folding stock version, the Israeli Uzi, and the British Sterling. The combination of functionality, simple design and production efficiency turned the MP-40 into a model to follow. Its legacy endures today in modern submachine guns, not only as a historical reference, but as an example of how a weapon can define the type of combat being fought. Its impact on military engineering and the evolution of light armament is undeniable, consolidating it as one of the most influential submachine guns of the 20th century. Volkswagen, from the Third Reich's car to the global icon of popular mobility. In Nazi Germany of the 1930s, the regime promoted the creation of an affordable automobile for the average worker. The idea was integrated into the Kraft durch Freude, Strength Through Joy program, a propaganda initiative that sought to project well-being within society. Based on that concept, engineer Ferdinand Porsche was commissioned to design a functional, economical and adaptable car for the needs of the German people. The result was a compact vehicle, with rounded lines, an air-cooled rear engine, and simple maintenance, which was renamed the KDF wagon. An industrial plant was built specifically for its manufacture in a new city created for that purpose. This locality, later known as Wolfsburg, would become the headquarters of Volkswagen. More than 300,000 citizens registered in a savings program to acquire the car, but mass production was never realized before the start of the Second World War. With the outbreak of the conflict, the factory was converted to produce military vehicles derived from the original design, such as the Kübelwagen, intended for troop transport, and the Schwimmwagen, an amphibious version adapted for marshy or river areas. Both models, although simple in appearance and low-powered, proved to be reliable and useful on the front. The lightweight design, efficient traction, and ease of repair in extreme conditions gave them a logistical advantage. These vehicles were widely used in campaigns in Poland, France, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. In addition, special versions were produced such as the Kommandeurswagen, an improved variant with all-wheel drive and modifications for officer use. During the conflict, more than 50,000 Kübelwagen and more than 15,000 Schwimmwagen came off the assembly lines. The expansion of production brought with it the systematic use of forced labor. Deported civilians from Eastern Europe, Soviet prisoners and Jews extracted from concentration camps worked in the facilities. The conditions were extremely harsh, with exhausting workdays, lack of food, and constant abuse. For pregnant women or those who gave birth within the complex, there were facilities supposedly dedicated to childcare, which in reality functioned as spaces of neglect, where the majority of newborns did not survive. With the end of the war, the facilities were severely damaged, but still functional in their technical structure. Wolfsburg was left in the British occupation zone. Instead of dismantling the plant, the British Army, under the leadership of engineer Evan Hurst, decided to reactivate production. The original model was minimally modified and renamed Volkswagen, the people's car. Although initially produced to cover the logistical needs of the Allied forces, it soon became a key tool for the German population undergoing reconstruction. Production was limited at first, due to the shortage of steel, energy and parts. However, with the support of the British, the factory managed to stabilize its operation. Supply chains were re-established, mechanics were trained, and a service network was set up. By 1947, the vehicle began to be exported to European countries, and within a few years, the Volkswagen gained ground in markets such as the Netherlands, Belgium, and Switzerland. In the following years, the Beetle, as it would be known for its distinctive shape, consolidated itself as one of the most popular automobiles of the 20th century. Its technical simplicity, low cost, and mechanical resilience made it attractive to millions of users worldwide. In Latin America, especially in Mexico, it became a symbol of urban life. In the United States, it was adopted by young people looking for alternatives to the conventional automotive model. In Germany, it represented the resilience of an industry that knew how to reinvent itself after the collapse of the Third Reich. Although its origin is deeply linked to the Nazi propaganda and military apparatus, the Beetle managed to detach itself from that historical burden through its massive civilian use. Its transformation from an ideological vehicle to a tool of global mobility is a testament to how an object can be completely redefined through time, necessity, and popular acceptance. Volkswagen as a brand evolved in parallel, going from being a factory at the service of an authoritarian regime to becoming one of the world's leading automobile manufacturers. Adidas and Puma, the rivalry born in the Second World War that still dominates sports. In the small Bavarian town of Herzogenaurach, two brothers found a way to reinvent themselves through sports footwear. Adolf Dassler, known as Adi, began making shoes in his mother's kitchen, using leather scraps and uniforms recovered from battlefields to create lightweight footwear for runners. His older brother, Rudolf, who had worked as a policeman, joined him in 1924, and together they founded the Gebrüder Dassler Schuhfabrik, Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory. Adi's talent for design innovation and Rudy's skill in sales transformed that small initiative into an expanding business. Their first models of running shoes with improved spikes attracted the attention of German coaches and athletes, reaching a production of hundreds of thousands of pairs annually in the 1930s. The great leap came in 1936 during the Berlin Olympic Games. Adi Dassler traveled with a suitcase of shoes and convinced the American sprinter Jesse Owens to wear a pair of his sneakers. Owens won 4 gold medals, defying the racial ideology of the Nazi regime. Although the impact was enormous, the Dasslers were linked to the German political system. In 1933, both had joined the National Socialist Party, and their factory ended up integrated into the war economy. When the Second World War began, the company transformed into a military supplier. At first, they continued to produce footwear, but by 1943 the plant was forced to manufacture portable anti-tank weapons, known as the Panzerfaust. Several forced labourers, including foreign prisoners, were assigned to the factory, which became the only active sports footwear plant in Germany, serving the Wehrmacht. Tensions between the brothers grew. They lived with their families under the same roof, and arguments were constant. The decisive episode occurred in 1943 during an Allied bombing, when Adi murmured, "There come those pigs again." Although he was referring to the enemy planes, Rudy understood it as an insult to his family. From that moment on, the distrust was irreversible. In the final years of the war, Adi was recruited as a radio operator, but was returned to the factory because he was considered more useful there. Rudy, on the other hand, was sent to the Eastern Front and then arrested by the Gestapo on suspicion of desertion, although he survived until the end of the conflict. In 1945, American troops were on the verge of destroying the factory, which had been converted into a military installation. According to testimonies, Kether, Adi's wife, convinced the soldiers that it was a sports footwear plant and recalled that the shoes with which Owens had triumphed in Berlin had been manufactured there. The intervention saved the facilities, and the North American occupants became some of the first post-war customers. The relationship between the brothers was beyond repair. In the subsequent denazification processes, Adi and Rudy testified against each other. Adi was penalized with a temporary ban on directing companies, although he soon overcame it. Rudy was imprisoned in an American camp and released in 1948. That same year, he definitively left the joint company, took some of the workers, and founded his own brand on the south bank of the Orak River, which he called Puma. A year later, Adi officially registered the Adidas brand on the north bank. Herzogenaurach was divided. Adidas and Puma became rival employers, and the inhabitants identified with one or the other company. It came to be called the City of Bent Necks, because before greeting, neighbors looked at the other person's footwear to know their loyalty. Even the local football clubs were aligned, one sponsored by Adidas and the other by Puma. In the first years after the war, Adidas took off more quickly. Adi focused on technical innovation, collaborated with coaches and athletes, and in 1954, the West German national football team won the World Cup wearing Adidas boots with interchangeable studs, which consolidated the brand internationally. During the 1960s, Adidas was already the main global supplier of sports footwear. Puma grew at a slower pace, but found its niche by signing contracts with key figures. In the 60s, Eusebio took the Puma King to the top of European football, and in 1970 Pelé starred in the most remembered publicity stunt. Before a kick-off in the Mexico World Cup, he bent down to tie his Puma boots in front of millions of spectators, breaking a verbal pact between both brands. The impact was immediate and reinforced Puma's strategy of betting on renowned athletes. That period was known as the Sneaker Wars. Adidas bet on entire teams, while Puma invested in individual figures. Legal demands for patents and disputes were frequent in a competition that transcended sports. The founders' children inherited control. Horst Dassler expanded Adidas to France and then to other markets, while Armin Dassler consolidated Puma after his father's death in 1974. Despite some contact between the new generations, the division remained intact. During the 70s and 80s, Adidas diversified into global sports fashion, and Puma adapted to urban culture. Over time, both companies ceased to be in the direct hands of the Dassler family and became international corporations. The rivalry, however, continued on a global scale. Today, Adidas is the largest sporting goods and footwear company in Europe and the second in the world, only behind Nike. Its headquarters are still in Herzogenaurach, but it operates all over the planet with annual revenues exceeding 20 billion euros. Puma, although smaller, maintains a presence in more than 120 countries and is one of the most recognized sports brands, with a strong focus on football and youth fashion. The history of Adidas and Puma shows how a family conflict in times of war gave rise to two global giants. What began as a small workshop ended up becoming two corporations that continue to face each other in stadiums, streets, and markets around the world. Enigma, from the World War to digital encryption. At the beginning of the 20th century, the need to keep messages secret became decisive for military security. Germany developed an encryption machine called Enigma, which worked with a mechanism of electric rotors capable of altering the letters entered on the keyboard. Every time an operator pressed a key, the signal passed through several disks that rotated continuously, and the resulting letter was never the same, even if the same input was repeated. This system generated an almost unlimited number of combinations, making it extremely difficult to decipher the messages without having another machine configured identically. The basic model of Enigma had 3 rotors that spun with each keystroke. The electric current passed through those disks, was reflected in a component called the reflector, and returned by a different path, producing more variations. In addition, it incorporated a plugboard that allowed pairs of letters to be interchanged, increasing the complexity. Subsequently, more elements were added, such as a 4th rotor in some military models, which multiplied the possibilities. The secret was in the shared key, the position of the rotors, the order of the cables, and the configuration of the plugboard. Only someone who had exactly the same arrangement could decipher the message. However, the machine had a limitation that would be fundamental for the Allies. No letter could be encrypted as itself. That apparent protection became a weak point. The Germans fully trusted Enigma and used it to coordinate operations on the land, air, and naval fronts. The keys were changed every day, forcing enemy cryptographers to start from zero in their attempts. At the beginning of the war, Polish mathematicians had made important progress, but as the complexity of the systems increased, the work passed into the hands of the British at a secret centre located in Bletchley Park. Alan Turing, a young mathematician who had already proposed theoretical concepts of machines capable of performing universal calculations, worked there. His role would be decisive. At Bletchley, Turing and his team designed a machine called the bomb. Its objective was to explore possible combinations and quickly discard those that did not match patterns detected in the German messages. The task was not simple, as the volume of possibilities was enormous. But thanks to this tool, the time necessary to find the correct key of the day was reduced. British intelligence operators took advantage of common repetitions in the messages, such as routine phrases used by the Germans, which helped to further limit the options. With this method, by mid-1940, Luftwaffe messages could already be read, and later naval communication was accessed, which was key to confronting the threat of submarines in the Atlantic. Turing's team, known as Hut 8, specialized in deciphering German naval messages. The work was essential because Allied convoys crossing the ocean suffered constant attacks from U-boats. The reports obtained allowed routes to be diverted and losses to be reduced. There was a period in 1942 when the Germans implemented improvements and the system became illegible for a few months, but with new captures of material and refinements of the techniques, the Allies regained the advantage. Turing also developed an additional method called banburismus, which allowed probable combinations to be further reduced, and later devised a system he called Turingery to work with another German encryption machine, the Lorenz, used for high-level communications. In 1942, Turing traveled to the United States to collaborate with intelligence services and explain the operation of the bombs, as well as to learn about North American advances in encrypted communication systems. Back in England, he continued working and created an experimental encrypted voice transmission device he called Delilah, although it was not used on a large scale. For his contribution to the war effort, he was named an officer of the British Empire in 1945. The deciphering of Enigma was not based solely on machines. The human interpretation of patterns, the discipline of the teams, and the analysis of errors made by the German operators themselves were equally important. Messages often included standard phrases or predictable greetings, which allowed cryptographers to obtain starting points. The fact that no letter was encoded as itself also made it easier to discard impossible configurations. Thus, the combination of human failures, technical weaknesses, and mathematical perseverance allowed the Allies to turn Enigma from an impregnable fortress into a vulnerable system. The impact of this work was immense. It is estimated that the ability to read German messages shortened the war by several years and saved innumerable lives. In the Atlantic, deciphering the orders to the submarines proved vital to ensure the supply of Great Britain. On the land and air fronts, the information obtained allowed movements to be anticipated and operations to be planned with greater precision. The success was so great that the secret was kept for decades after the war. Only in the 1970s was the magnitude of what was achieved at Bletchley Park revealed to the public. But the legacy of Enigma did not end in 1945. The effort of Turing and his colleagues laid the foundations for modern computing. The bomb machine, although designed for a specific purpose, represented a step toward the concept of automatic computation. Shortly after, Colossus emerged, considered the first programmable digital computer used to decipher the Lorenz. These experiences demonstrated that machines could perform calculations at speeds impossible for humans and opened the way to the age of computers. Enigma also left a legacy in cryptography. The fundamental principle was the transformation of a clear message into an incomprehensible one using a shared key. That idea is known today as symmetric encryption. Two parties possess the same key and use it to encode and decode the information. The problem is that if a third party obtains that key, the entire system is compromised. For this reason, new methods were developed decades later. One of them was the Diffie-Hellman protocol, which allows two people to generate a common key without the need to transmit it directly, even on insecure channels. This advance paved the way for asymmetric cryptography, where each user manages a private and a public key, which adds a superior level of security. The current applications of these ideas are broad. From online banking transactions to instant messaging on phones, most communication systems use encryption algorithms based on the principles that emerged from the study of Enigma. When someone sends a message, it becomes an illegible text for anyone who intercepts it, except for the recipient who possesses the correct key. This is how sensitive data is protected in a digital world where threats are constant. Over time, standards such as DES were established in the 1970s, and then AES in 2001, which follow the same logic of transforming messages with keys, but with more complex mathematical structures resistant to the calculation capacity of modern computers. Even the arrival of quantum computing has driven the development of systems prepared to resist decryption attempts with that technology. However, all these advances have their root in the same idea that prompted German engineers to create Enigma and the Allies to break its secret, the need to protect information in times of war and peace. The Enigma machine, designed to guarantee Germany's military supremacy, ended up being the catalyst for a technological revolution. What began as a keyboard connected to electric rotors evolved into mathematical theories, electronic computers, and digital protocols that today sustain information security across the planet. The work of Turing and those who worked at Bletchley Park not only changed the course of the Second World War, but also defined the future of secure communication. From a small mechanical device with cables and disks, modern cryptography was born, which protects every transaction and every piece of data in the daily lives of millions of people. The German watch that went from battle to daily life. In the years leading up to the Second World War, Germany was already a country with a long watchmaking tradition. In Saxony, the town of Glashütte had achieved international fame thanks to the work of Ferdinand Adolf Lang, founder of the A. Lang and Söhne House, while in Pforzheim, further west, another company soon gained relevance, Laco Durov. Both factories were destined to play a key role during the conflict, manufacturing high-precision military watches that after the war transformed into the models that popularized the robust and functional wristwatch that we wear today. The story begins in 1845, when Ferdinand A. Lang founded a watch workshop in Glashütte with the idea of modernizing the German watchmaking industry. His descendants kept the company going for decades, specializing in pocket watches and chronometers of the highest quality. However, with the advance of the 20th century and the arrival of the 1930s, the panorama changed radically. Germany was preparing for war, and the demand for precision watches for military aviation grew rapidly. It was in this context that A. Lang and Söhne, along with other houses like Stower, Wemper or Laco, received the commission to produce the observation watches known as B-Uhren, large pieces, up to 55 millimeters, designed for Luftwaffe pilots. These watches had very specific characteristics: black dials with large luminescent numbers, oversized hands so they could be read even in dark cockpits, and a large crown that allowed them to be adjusted while wearing gloves. They were navigation instruments rather than simple watches, designed to synchronize air missions and calculate routes in night flights. Langer's calibers, especially the 48 and 48.1, were the heart of many of these military watches, which stood out for their accuracy even in extreme conditions. Meanwhile, in the city of Pforzheim, the Laco Durov firm, founded in the 20s, grew rapidly. The company produced movements and complete watches, and during the war was also selected as a supplier of aviator watches for the Luftwaffe. The Laco B-Uhren were as prized as those from Glashütte for their resistance and their chronometric precision. Thousands of German pilots wore these watches on their wrists during long-range operations. The war, however, left deep scars. In May of 1945, Glashütte was bombed by Soviet troops, and the main headquarters of Lange was destroyed, while Pforzheim suffered aerial attacks that devastated more than 80% of the city. After the collapse of the Third Reich, both stories took different paths. In the east, A. Lange and Söhne was nationalized under Soviet administration, and its name disappeared from the market for decades, absorbed into a state-owned company. It was not until after German reunification in 1990 that Walter Lange, the founder's great-grandson, was able to refound the company and return it to the world luxury watchmaking map. In contrast, in the West, Laco Durov survived thanks to the reconstruction supported by the Marshall Plan. During the 1950s, it came to produce up to 80,000 movements per month and became one of the most important factories in Germany. It even innovated with the Duramat, its first automatic caliber, and in 1961 it presented the first German electric watch that worked stably. Although both companies experienced crises, sales, and changes of ownership, they left a lasting legacy: the water-resistant, large and high-precision military wristwatch, which became the standard for soldiers first and then for the civilian population. During the conflict, the Wehrmacht had massively distributed issued watches among officers and troops, which popularized the use of the wristwatch instead of the pocket watch. After the war, that habit quickly spread throughout Europe and beyond. The designs of the B-Uhren, with their large dials and functional aesthetic, inspired generations of manufacturers. Even after the war, similar issued watches continued to be produced for armies around the world. Today, both Lange and Söhne and Laco have recovered and reinterpreted these historic models. Lange returned to the high-end watchmaking market in the 90s, with luxury pieces that recall its tradition, while Laco relaunched several editions of pilot watches from the 1940s, which remain very popular among collectors and enthusiasts. The transformation of these military-issued watches into everyday accessories was surprising. In the post-war era, veterans returned home still wearing their field watches, which soon became part of civilian attire. That transition turned military watches into a mass trend. Today, the idea of a resistant, legible and reliable watch, a direct inheritance of the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe, remains valid both in military-use watches and in street models. Currently, Lange and Söhne produces only a few thousand pieces per year, each assembled by hand and considered a masterpiece of luxury watchmaking, while Laco has consolidated itself as a firm that combines artisanal tradition with modern pilot watches inspired by its historical models. In both cases, the Second World War designs are still a central part of their identity. Thus, an instrument that was born on the battlefields and in the cockpits of military aircraft ended up setting the pace for the daily lives of millions of people. The German military wrist watches not only measured time in the midst of war, but also marked the rhythm of the post-war era and modern life. Today, when looking at the wrist and seeing a water-resistant watch with high precision and functional aesthetics, it is impossible not to recognize that its origin dates back to Glashütte and Pforzheim, to those factories that one day worked for the German army, and that, over time, transformed into symbols of quality and watchmaking tradition. Night vision born in the Reich. In the final stage of the conflict, when German troops were already losing ground, an unusual device emerged that was created to offer an advantage during the night. This was the ZG-1229 Vampire, an infrared vision system that was installed on the STG-44 assault rifle. Its design was the responsibility of the AEG company, along with the Reichspost Research Institute, while its manufacture was in charge of the Ernst Leitz GmbH firm. Only a few hundred units were manufactured, intended to transform the combatant into a night shooter, who was known as a Nachtjäger. The assembly included an infrared sight and a projector with a filter that emitted light invisible to the human eye. Everything was powered by a battery of about 30 kilos that the combatant had to carry in a field harness, accompanied by another smaller battery that went into a gas mask box and served to operate the image converter. The weight and fragility of the system made it uncomfortable in quick operations, although it achieved its purpose, offering a clear image in the gloom. It could distinguish a moving person up to 70 meters away, which was an unprecedented innovation at the time. The first field tests with rifles equipped with the Vampire are documented in the first months of 1945, when the Reich was already facing defeat. Some accounts mention earlier experiments on the Eastern Front around 1944, with snipers using similar equipment, although the most solid evidence places the first deployments just in the last weeks of the conflict. Several veterans claim to have seen rifles with lanterns that did not shine, a detail that matches the characteristics of the apparatus. There are also talks of attempts to adapt it to MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns, although the short detection distance made it impractical for those types of weapons. The ZG-1229 did not detect body heat, but rather the reflection of the infrared light emitted by its own spotlight, which limited its usefulness but set a precedent. Although its operational life was short and it never became widespread, it paved the way for a technology that would end up becoming an essential part of military and civilian equipment worldwide. With the end of the conflict, the Allied powers studied the prototypes and based their principles on them to develop new generations of night vision. During the Vietnam War, the first autonomous devices appeared that no longer required external infrared emitters, but amplified ambient light. Those pieces of equipment, known as first generation, were more compact and practical. In the following decades, the evolution was constant. It transitioned to image intensification systems, then to thermal cameras, and finally to digital sensors capable of working both day and night. The big change came with the incorporation of CMOS and CCD technologies, similar to those used by photographic cameras, which lowered costs and improved durability. Today, night vision is no longer exclusive to armies. It is used in security forces, border patrols, rescue operations, and also in civilian areas such as hunting, hiking, or home surveillance. Security cameras incorporate infrared vision as a standard function. In rural areas, hunters and forest rangers use thermal viewers to track animals in the dark without the need for flashlights. The latest models also include advanced functions: high-definition recording, wireless transmission, automatic motion detection, and integration with augmented reality programs. There are helmets with digital viewers that link to mobile phones and that anyone can buy online, something unthinkable when the Vampire weighed dozens of kilos and was a privilege of a handful of soldiers. What in 1945 was an experiment limited to a few assault rifles ended up evolving into a global technology. The basic principle of the Vampire, emitting infrared and translating its reflection into a visible image, opened a path that led to the compact and multifunctional devices that today make a difference in military operations, in police forces, in rescue tasks, and even in everyday life. Throughout this journey, it became clear that even after 80 years, many of the ideas, weapons, substances, technologies, and brands that emerged under the Third Reich did not disappear with the fall of the regime. Some objects changed shape, others adapted to the civil market, and several evolved to fully integrate into our daily lives. What began as part of a machinery of war and control is still present, sometimes without us knowing it. This technical, practical, or commercial legacy cannot be separated from its context of origin, but its permanence cannot be denied either. Those traces, discrete or evident, are still there, reminding us that the past is not always left behind. It often transforms, is redesigned, and survives in the most unexpected places.